Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Survey and Spatial webinar. Everyone communicates, few connect. Our presenter today is Andy Ralston. As a former rugby player and coach, Andy experienced many different coaching and leadership methodologies, but one in particular shifted his perspective. He was introverted and didn't know how to spark a conversation with a stranger. At 19, he read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It inspired a passion for leadership and personal growth, similar to the one he always had while playing rugby. Today, he combines that passion for sport and personal development as a leadership coach. He helps leaders understand the individual strengths of their team and how to bond everyone on that team. So we're joining Andy today so you can learn strategies for communicating effectively with your team in a way that helps you reach your maximum potential while guiding them to do the same. So now I'd like to hand you over to Andy for his presentation.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. So excited to be here with you today and really just to spend the next half hour or so with you. And what makes this time so special for me is I'm here to talk about a subject that changed my life when I was like 19 years old, as Jenny mentioned. Everyone communicates, few connect. And this is a massive subject in my view. And I'm basing my comments today on a book by the same title by John Maxwell, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. Now, my purpose here today is really to raise your awareness that leadership is a teachable skill and to give some really practical information that you can apply right away, right today. And so I want to convince you, if you're not already convinced, that is, that we are all leaders in one way or another. And leadership comes down to one thing, influence. Leadership is influence, and influence depends on our ability to connect with people. So it's kind of one thing that stands between you and greater success in your personal and professional life. And it isn't knowledge, it isn't skills or experience or talent, although those things do help, but it's really your ability to be able to connect with people. You see, we live in a world where success is increasingly dependent upon collaboration. And so if that's the case, then we must learn to connect with people. And it's a common misconception that certain people are born with the ability to connect with other people. And yet the truth is anybody can learn how to make every communication an opportunity for a powerful connection. And Jenny mentioned my story. At the age of 19, I was introduced to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And as an introvert, someone who found it difficult to spark a conversation with a group of strangers, what this book taught me to do was how to have a conversation, how to start a conversation, how to keep someone engaged. It taught me how to connect. And I'd have to say it revolutionarily changed my life. And for the last 30 odd years, I've been practicing those concepts in that book. And so now I'm quite comfortable in a room full of people. I'm able to strike up a conversation. I find it easy to connect with people. But I do have to put a disclaimer. I'm still an introvert, and I would still rather be standing in the corner of the room or just watching people. So it's still outside my comfort zone, even 30 or 35 years later. I still get uncomfortable about doing that, but I can do it quite naturally. So just because you're an introvert or you've practiced the skills doesn't necessarily mean that it's just going to be a walk in the park. Now, if I was to ask you, how many here want to improve your results? I'm sure every single hand would go up. Because the bottom line is we all want to improve the results that we're getting in our lives, right? Now, for a lot of people, they might want to improve how much money they're making. Maybe it's more time you need. Maybe you want to change your lifestyle or have better relationships. Maybe you want to improve your health. Now, what I've come to realize is that, and it's taken me way longer than I should, but the truth is if we want to get better results, we've got to get better at connecting with people. And so I'm talking about better connections with our parents. Maybe it's a spouse or partner. Maybe it's our children. Maybe it's someone who runs their own business. Maybe it's a client. Maybe it's a manager or vice president. It doesn't really matter who we are. You can improve your results by improving your ability to connect and influence people in an ethical way. So if you want to improve your marriage, then connecting with your spouse will make a huge difference. If you want to get a promotion, then you need to connect with people in a better way with your boss. If you want to get that contract with a client, then you need to be able to connect with them better, maybe your peers or your team. See, if you want to improve your relationships with your friends, it's all about connecting. See, we need people, and we can't do anything in today's world without other people in our lives. We need to be able to connect and influence other people to succeed in this world. And so the friction we experience in our day-to-day life comes down to leadership, connecting, and influence. Now, what I'm talking about today is 100% a teachable skill, which means you can learn to connect, you can learn to lead, and you can also learn to improve your ability to influence people. That is, if you want to. Now, I spend a great deal of time trying to convince people that it's a common misconception that certain people are born with the ability to connect. See, I like to say only babies are born, which means that everything else we do is something we have to learn. Yet the truth is, anybody can learn how to make every communication an opportunity for a powerful connection. It's within your reach. And as I said, for me, it might be outside your comfort zone, but it is within your reach. You see, the reason that learning to connect can make such a difference to your results is that it's such a neglected skill by most people. Most people don't give any thought whatsoever to developing their ability to connect with other people, either because they don't see it as a skill or they actually don't see it as being important. And because they don't give it any thought, it's outside of their awareness. They're not conscious of the impact that it has on them. Now, this probably wouldn't be such a problem if people weren't so emotional. You see, as human beings, we are emotional creatures at heart. Yes, we have an intellect, but we often kid ourselves that we are rational, logical human beings. That's just a facade. We're generally emotional creatures, and emotions often rule our lives. Now, why is this a problem? So how many of you have heard something like, you know, he does that if you push his buttons, or you want to know how to really get her going? You see, we can all be logical in certain situations, but there are other situations with a certain trigger that will flip our switch. And, you know, we can't help ourselves. We all know the person that will just fly off the handle at the drop of a button. You know, they erupt like Mount Ruapehu, and they just can't seem to help themselves. Well, in John's book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect, he lays out some powerful learning system that's split into two parts: connecting principles and connecting practices. Now, when these are integrated and applied, these lessons will help you redefine and reinvent your personal, professional, and family relationships. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to connecting than we can cover here today. I could dedicate a whole day or a one-day workshop to really understanding the principles of connecting. But let me summarize them here for you here now. See, applying the principles through the practices that we go over in the workshop is something that you can apply right away. So let me talk about some of the key practices today, so that if this is something that interests you, you want to improve your people skills, you want to improve your ability to connect, then you have some tools that you can use right away today. How many of you heard of John Maxwell? He's not very well known in New Zealand. He's much more well known overseas. And if you were on my last webinar a few months ago, you would have heard me talk about him. What about Ken Blanchard or Steve Covey? I'm sure a lot more people have heard of those guys. But what if I was to tell you that John Maxwell, as a leader in 2014, was identified by the American Management Association as the most influential leadership expert in the world by Business Insider and Incorporated magazine. And as founder of the Maxwell Leadership Company, he's trained, or his organization has trained over 5 million leaders all over the world. He speaks to Fortune 500 companies, presidents, many of the top world business leaders. But more importantly, John is a friend of mine. He's a business partner and mentor. And I'd have to say he's one of the most skilled communicators, and more importantly, one of the most skilled connectors that I have ever met. You see, you don't need to understand why the techniques of connecting work. Just need to understand the principles that underpin them. And then, of course, you need to apply them. Now, one principle is that connecting increases your influence in every single situation. And according to Harvard Business Review, the #1 criteria for advancement and promotion for professionals is the ability to communicate effectively. Now, presidential historian Robert Dallek says this, that successful presidents exhibit 5 skills and qualities that enable them to achieve things that others don't. They are number 1, vision. Number 2, pragmatism. Number 3, consensus building. Number 4, charisma. And number 5, trustworthiness. Now, if we put aside our political opinions and biases for a moment and just look at the abilities of some of their past presidents. Now, as I was thinking about this, I was trying to think of who were some of our prime ministers in New Zealand that exhibited some of these traits. I can think of someone like David Lange, who was a great communicator. John Key, I think, exhibited some of these qualities. Helen Clark was a great person to get consensus building. Perhaps didn't have a lot of charisma, but we've had a number of prime ministers that exhibited some of these facts. But the one I want to talk about today is, for those that are a little bit older, you might remember Jimmy Carter in America, who was the peanut farmer, and Ronald Reagan, who was an actor. Now, when they were contesting the presidential election, during the debate, what was really interesting is that Jimmy Carter, during that election, came across as really cold and impersonal. He was quoting facts and figures, whereas in contrast, Ronald Reagan was engaged with the audience, and he was even engaged with Jimmy Carter. Reagan connected with the audience, and he connected with the American people in such a way that they called him the great communicator. Now, I remember in the early 2000s, I moved to Toronto, Canada with my family because I was coaching rugby over there. And one day I just happened to pop into one of my players' parents' place. Now, Margaret and Olwen were from Northern Ireland, and they'd immigrated to Canada some 30 odd years before. And so I called in just to have a chat. We're sitting on the couch having a great chat for about 30 minutes. And then I left and went home. Anyway, as I was walking in my front door of my house, my wife said to me, she said, "I just got a call from Margaret." And I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "Margaret just said that she had to confess to me that you'd popped in, but she didn't understand a word that you were saying." So for 30 minutes, she was just smiling and nodding her head. And as we were talking about that, we had a good laugh about that. But what was interesting is, even though we both spoke English, there was a disconnect. And maybe a couple of things came into play that maybe my accent was hard to understand, which I found some of the Canadians did find us hard to understand. And maybe I was talking too fast, because I think a lot of Kiwis, from my experience, do talk a little faster than a lot of other countries. But the lesson for me was I needed to slow down, and I needed to make sure that I articulated my words properly. You see, just because you speak the same language doesn't mean that you'll have an automatic connection. See, connecting is the ability to identify with people and relate to them in such a way that it increases our influence with them. Now, I could relate with Margaret in a more personal way as a result of a mistake I made by just thinking that she was understanding me. You see, some people connect intuitively, don't they? They have this high interpersonal intelligence, and they just seem to value people automatically. Whereas others recognize that connecting is important, but they lack the tools and the techniques. So they need to learn to do what others do intuitively. And at some point, some other people don't recognize connecting as important at all. They think that they have to do it all on their own. They don't need other people. Why rely on others when it's quicker to do it yourself? Remember the saying, if you want to do something done right, then do it yourself. And people only let you down anyway. But the better we are able to connect with other people, the better our results. Someone once said to me, "Well, what about rocket scientists? It wouldn't apply to them, would it?" Now, as I thought about that, I said, so which skill is rarer, a rocket scientist or someone who can lead a team of rocket scientists to produce meaningful results in a coordinated fashion, on time and on budget? Or the CEO of Rocket Scientists Incorporated? See, often the more brilliant people are, the more difficult they are to lead. So we need people, and people are emotional creatures. Now, if we continue to outline this problem, picture this. Here's a typical leader in an organization. He may be the owner of a company, the leader of a department, any kind of leader with a team. It doesn't really matter. Now, earlier I said that everyone wants to improve their results. So the company owner wants to improve his results. The leader wants to improve their results. Everyone on the team wants to improve their results. Now, given that we're all different, we can assume that we all want different results, right? Different things are important to us, aren't they? So we can represent this graphically as an arrow. This person wants to go in this direction, this person in that direction, and so on. So if the leader of an organization wants to improve results, then he's talking about this. Now, if they're not a connector, if they don't value others, then there's a tendency to think that the way to improve results is to work harder yourself. And then, of course, tell everybody else that they have to do the same. After all, how do most people in leadership positions, how do most people in organizations get the leadership position? Well, it's normally based on technical assessment, isn't it? The best technician gets promoted to lead the team. The trouble with this is that leadership and technical skills are two totally different skills. Technical skills are technical skills, and leadership is influence, connecting with people, which comes from valuing people. You see, technical skill and valuing people are polar opposites. One is left brain and the other is right brain. The technician simply doesn't see the world that way. They will often say, if you want people to do what they should, then just show them the policy manual. So the leader who can't connect works harder themselves. And look what happens graphically when that happens. Let's say the leader works 20, 30% harder. What does that do to the overall effort of the team? Well, if you can see by the graph, it goes up very little, doesn't it? With the blue line there. Makes a big difference to him, big difference to his wife and family, but very little difference to anything else. But the connector that realizes that if they could just get another 10% out of everybody in the team, then that adds up to far more than they can contribute themselves. And as a result, they don't get divorced in the process. You see, leadership is influence, and leadership is results through others. It's all about others. But the reason connecting is such a skill is that it's much more complicated than just saying, okay, I'm going to get more out of others. It's not something you can just decide or even mandate. You've actually got to be able to connect. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that anybody can learn how to make every communication an opportunity for a powerful connection. It's really just like any other skill. But you do need to learn it, and you do need to practice it. Now it brings me to the next principle. Connecting is more of a skill than natural talent. Now I love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. All great speakers were bad speakers first. Isn't that the truth? No one was born a good speaker. And I can, testify to that. I remember the first time I spoke, I don't think I was that good, but when you practice a skill over and over, you get better at it. And connecting is something that anybody can learn to do, but you've got to study it and you've got to practice it to improve it. Now, to connect with others, you must also make use of all the skills and experience that you have. And there are several factors that great communicators draw upon that cause people to listen to them. The first one is relationships. Who do you know? See, a quick way to gain credibility with an individual or a group or an audience is to borrow it from someone else who has credibility with them. Who you know can open the door for you to connect with someone. For example, you might be wanting to get a new client or get into an organization or get an introduction, and you happen to know someone, say John, who works for that company. So you go to John and you ask John for an introduction to that person. And so you get the introduction, you get the meeting, and you automatically have this connection because of John. John is the common factor. And so that's what relationships can do for you. The next is insight. What do you know? See, if you share an area of expertise generously with others, you can give people reasons to respect and develop a sense of connection with you. Number 3 is success. What have you done? People want to be successful, and people will seek out others who have accomplished something to get their advice. So if you're successful in anything that you do, there will be people around who will want to listen to you and want to connect with you. Number 4 is ability. What you can do. If you have a high level of ability in an area, then others may want to connect with you because of that ability. You see, excellence connects. Individuals who perform at a high level in their profession often have instant credibility with others. People admire them. They want to be like them. They feel connected to them in some way. When they speak, others listen. And if we think about Michael Jordan for a minute, he's made more money from the endorsements that he had than he ever did playing basketball. And why is that? Was it because of his knowledge or the use of the products that he endorsed? No, it was because of what he could do with the basketball, right? And number 5 is sacrifice. How have you lived? If you've made sacrifices, maybe suffered a tragedy or overcome some painful obstacle, many people can relate to you. And if you've been able to remain positive in the midst of those difficulties, then others will admire you and they will connect with you. Now, these 5 connection factors are just the beginning. I'm sure that you could probably think of other reasons that people might want to connect with you. See, the point is, you must take whatever you have and use it to connect with others. The more factors that you have, the better you become at using them, the greater your chance of connecting with people. You must play to your strengths and develop your own style and cultivate whatever skills you can in order to connect with people. Max De Pree, author of Leadership as an Art, said this: "There may be no single thing more important in our efforts to achieve meaningful work and fulfilling relationships than to learn to practice the art of communication." And I couldn't agree more with that statement. So let's just recap on some of the key messages so far. See, leadership is critical because anything worthwhile you achieve in life, every area of your life, will be with and through other people. Everything rises and falls with leadership. And what is leadership? Leadership is influence. So how can I develop my ability to influence others? Well, develop the skill of connecting. And how can I develop my skill of connecting? Learn to value others. Then there's a shift in perception. So if you take you out of the center and place others in the center, then let's take a look at a practice that can help you connect better. See, I used to think about being the best. If you wanted to lead, you had to be the best. If you want people to listen, you've got to impress them. But influence is not about impressing people. It's about connecting with them. It's not a logical thing. It's an emotional thing. Remember, we said earlier that people are emotional beings. They're not principally logical. They're principally emotional. And to understand how to connect with people emotionally, we need to understand that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, and we're all different. Let me illustrate what I mean by this. I want you to take a look at this picture. You've got 5 seconds to decide what you see. How many of you see a black urn? And how many of you see 2 people face to face looking at each other? See, it all depends on where your awareness is. Once I said the opposite of what you saw first, did you see the other? But it's the same picture. So isn't that interesting? The very same picture viewed differently by different people. So if the picture is the same, then the difference must be in the individual, right? You see, there's something very different that's happened to the average adult that changes the way they see things. And that difference is called conditioning. You see, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Now, this goes to a long way to explaining why we don't get what we want. We get what we are. Now, the implications for this are enormous in regards to communication because we all see the world differently. Now, this is a pretty simple example, but it does illustrate a powerful point that we are all different. We see the world differently. We all have different beliefs, different values, different things are important to us, and we have different passions, expectations, and tolerances. And if we're to ignore this when we were trying to connect, we're missing the whole point of connecting. You see, connectors understand this one thing. They know that to connect with people, they have to connect on common ground. You see, if I talk to you about my beliefs or my values and they're not yours, then you're probably not that interested intellectually. And there's certainly no emotional resonance with me. You can't really relate because you don't have that greater feeling. Now, worse yet, if I happen to violate your beliefs while I do it, now you not only not get a good feeling, you actually get a bad feeling. You see, nobody likes to be told that what they believe is wrong. If you challenge someone's beliefs directly, then you're going to get their back up. And if it's their core beliefs, what they really value, then they might actually want to hurt you. You see, this is our ego in its stripped down, raw state. It wants to eliminate anybody that doesn't agree with us. So if you want to connect with someone, you've got to go to them. You have to go first, and you need to connect on common ground. It's kind of why there's a saying that says, 3 things you shouldn't talk about: politics, religion, and finances, because we all have different beliefs or different ideas about that. But where our beliefs and theirs intersect, that's common ground. Then we can connect with them here. Then we can take them where we want to go. But if we don't connect, they won't go with us. Now, of course, this takes quite a lot of energy. It takes energy to connect with people, and it can be exhausting sometimes. But the investment is necessary. And I think that's true of anything in life, really, isn't it? If we want to sow and expect to reap a harvest, then we've got to make that investment. Now, we're getting close to the end, and so we're going to have to leave it here shortly, but hopefully we've covered some information that you'll not only find interesting, but some ideas that you can start using right away. But before we finish up, let me cover this, because I think it's key to any kind of program of change. Now, I trust you found this interesting and enjoyable. Usually this presentation is pretty well received, and it has a lot of good information in it. But the trouble is, it doesn't have the impact that it needs to have for one simple reason. Change is not an event, it's a process. You see, we have a tendency to overestimate the event and a tendency to underestimate the process. You see, an event, which is important, won't develop you as a communicator and a connector, but it can certainly get you started on becoming better. Now, if you think about it, to develop as a communicator and a connector, we need to think about changing our behaviors. And unfortunately, we can't just snap our fingers and be changed. Now, I wish I had more time to talk about this book. I'd love to share some other principles and practices with you, but I am conscious of time. So we can continue to communicate and connect the way we have been, or we can choose to intentionally develop these skills and increase our influence and leadership, and as a result, improve our results. Now, we've briefly touched on a few principles for communicating and connecting. So imagine doing a deeper dive into these lessons, perhaps in a group setting or individually in a private coaching session. What would happen to you and your team if you took a deeper dive into becoming better communicators? What would that do for your personal growth? What would that do for your business? What would that do for your team? So what I would like you to do as I close is, actually, I think Jenny is going to send out an email with a link to a survey form. It's just simply one question. And so what the question says is that if you would find the material that I've presented here today, if it would help you and your company achieve better results, then just tick yes or no. And if you tick yes, then I'll be in touch with you and we can have a chat and have a discussion about what that would look like. And this is a no obligation chat, but I would love the opportunity to talk to you about how you can further your growth, how you can become a better communicator. So I hope the session has added value to you today. Thank you for your attentiveness, and thank you, Jenny, for having me on here again today. And I'd love to answer questions. So if you've got any questions about the presentation today, then I'd love to be able to answer those for you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. So for our members who are online, if you do have any questions for Andy, you can pop them into the Slido box now, and I'll read them out to Andy so he can answer them. Or alternatively, if you think of some questions at the end of this presentation, please just email them through to me, and I'll forward them on to Andy, who will respond to you via email. I'll also be sending that survey link out to you shortly, so if you could please take just a moment to click on the link that comes through to your email, and that will go directly to Andy. So I'll just check to see if anybody has any questions for us. And Andy, it doesn't look like there's any questions coming through, so we'll close off on today's webinar. So thank you once again, Andy, for your time, and thanks again to our members for joining us on this event. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Thank you.